The Shack, where tragedy confronts eternity. Over 2 million copies in print. New York, #1 New York Times bestseller. W.M. Paul Young. This book has potential to do for generations what John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress did for his. It's that good. Quoth Eugene Peterson. What others are saying about The Shack? The Shack. (2007) Foreword. Foreword. This story was written for my children: Chad, the gentle deep, Nicholas, the tender explorer, Andrew, the kind-hearted affection, Amy, the joyful knower, Alexandra, parenthetically Lexi, the shining power, Matthew, the becoming wonder, and dedicated first to Kim, my beloved. Thank you for saving my life. And second, to all us stumblers who believe love rules, stand up and let it shine. Who wouldn't be skeptical when a man claims to have spent an entire weekend with God? In a shack, no less, and this was the shack. I have known Mac for a bit more than 20 years, since the day we both showed up at a neighbor's house to help him bale a field of hay to put up for his couple of cows. Since then, he and I have been, as the kids say these days, hanging out, sharing a coffee, and for me a chai tea, extra hot with soy. Our conversations bring a deep sort of pleasure, always sprinkled with lots of laughs, and once in a while, a tear or two. Frankly, the older we get, the more we hang out, if you know what I mean. His full name is Mackenzie Allen Phillips, although most people call him Alan, it's a family tradition. The men all have the same first name, but are commonly known by their middle names, presumably to avoid the ostentation of 1, 2, and 3, or junior and senior. It works well for identifying telemarketers, too, especially the ones who call as if they were your best friend. So he and his grandfather, father, and now his oldest son all have the given name of Mackenzie, but are commonly referred to by their middle names. Only Nan, his wife, and close friends call him Mac, although I've heard a few total strangers yell, "Hey, Mac! Where'd you learn to drive?" Mac was born somewhere in the Midwest, a farm boy in an Irish-American family, committed to calloused hands and rigorous rules. Although externally religious, his overly strict church elder father was a closet drinker, especially when the rain didn't come or came too early, and most of the times in between. Mac never talks much about him, but when he does, his face loses emotion like a tide going out, leaving dark and lifeless eyes. From the few stories Mac has told me, I know his daddy was not a fall-asleep happy kind of alcoholic, but a vicious, mean, beat your wife and then ask God for forgiveness drunk. It all came to a head when 13-year-old Mackenzie reluctantly bared his soul to a church leader during a youth revival. Overtaken by the conviction of the moment, Mac confessed in tears that he hadn't done anything to help his mama, as he witnessed on more than one occasion his drunken dad beat her unconscious. What Mac failed to consider was that his confessor worked and churched with his father, and by the time he got home, his daddy was waiting for him on the front porch with his mama and sisters conspicuously absent. He later learned that they had been shuttled off to his Aunt May's in order to give his father some freedom to teach his rebellious son a lesson about respect. For almost 2 days, tied to the big oak at the back of the house, he was beaten with a belt and Bible verses every time his dad woke from his stupor and put down his bottle. 2 weeks later, when Mac was finally able to put one foot in front of the other again, he just up and walked away from home. But before he left, he put varmint poison in every bottle of booze he could find on the farm. He then unearthed from next to the outhouse the small tin box housing all his earthly treasures. One photograph of the family with everybody squinting as they looked into the sun. His daddy standing off to one side. A 1950 Luke Easter rookie baseball card. A little bottle that contained about 1 ounce of Ma Griff, the only perfume his mama had ever worn, a spool of thread, and a couple needles. A small silver die-cast U.S. Air Force F-86 jet, and his entire life savings, $15.13. He crept back into the house and slipped a note under his mama's pillow while his father lay snoring off another binge. It just said, "Someday, I hope you can forgive me." He swore he would never look back, and he didn't. Not for a long time. 13 is too young to be all grown up, but Mac had little choice and adapted quickly. He doesn't talk much about the years that followed. Most of it was spent overseas, working his way around the world, sending money to his grandparents, who passed it on to his mama in one of those distant countries. I think he even picked up a gun in some kind of terrible conflict. He's hated war with a dark passion ever since I've known him. Whatever happened, in his early 20s, he eventually ended up in a seminary in Australia. When Mac had his fill of theology and philosophy, he came back to the States, made peace with his mama and sisters, and moved out to Oregon, where he met and married Nanette A. Samuelson. In a world of talkers, Mac is a thinker and doer. He doesn't say much unless you ask him directly, which most folks have learned not to do. When he does speak, you wonder if he isn't some sort of alien who sees the landscape of human ideas and experiences differently than everybody else. The thing is, he usually makes uncomfortable sense in a world where most folks would rather just hear what they're used to hearing, which is often not much of anything. Those who know him generally like him well enough, providing he keeps his thoughts mostly to himself. And when he does talk, it isn't that they stop liking him. Rather, they are not quite so satisfied with themselves. Mac once told me that he used to speak his mind more freely in his younger years, but he admitted that most of such talk was a survival mechanism to cover his hurts. He often ended up spewing his pain on everyone around him. He says that he had a way of pointing out people's faults and humiliating them while maintaining his own sense of false power and control. Not too endearing. As I pen these words, I reflect on the Mac I've always known. Quite ordinary and certainly not anyone particularly special, except to those who truly know him. He's just about to turn 56, and he is a rather unremarkable, slightly overweight, balding, short, white guy, which describes a lot of men in these parts. You probably wouldn't notice him in a crowd or feel uncomfortable sitting next to him while he snoozes on the Max Metro Transit during his once-a-week trip into town for a sales meeting. He does most of his work from a little home office at his place up on Wildcat Road. He sells something high-tech and gadgety that I don't pretend to understand. Techno gizmos that somehow make everything go faster. As if life weren't going fast enough already. You don't realize how smart Mac is unless you happen to eavesdrop on a dialogue he might be having with an expert. I've been there. When suddenly the language being spoken hardly resembles English, and I find myself struggling to grasp the concepts spilling out like a tumbling river of gemstones. He can speak intelligently about most anything, and even though you sense he has strong convictions, he has a gentle way about him that lets you keep yours. His favorite topics are all about God and creation and why people believe what they do. His eyes light up and he gets this smile that curls at the corners of his lips, and suddenly, like a little kid, the tiredness melts away and he becomes ageless and hardly able to contain himself. But at the same time, Mac is not very religious. He seems to have a love-hate relationship with religion, and maybe even with the God that he suspects is brooding, distant, and aloof. Little barbs of sarcasm occasionally spill through the cracks in his reserve, like piercing darts dipped into poison from a well deep inside. Although we sometimes both show up on Sundays at the local Pew and Pulpit Bible Church, the 55th Independent Assembly of St. John the Baptist, we like to call it, you can tell that he's not too comfortable there. Mac has been married to Nan for just more than 33, mostly happy years. He says she saved his life and paid a high price to do it. For some reason, beyond understanding, she seems to love him now more than ever, even though I get the sense that he hurt her something fierce in the early years. I suppose that since most of our hurts come through relationships, so will our healing. And I know that grace rarely makes sense for those looking in from the outside. In any case, Mac married up. Nan is the mortar that holds the tiles of their family together. While Mac has struggled in a world with many shades of gray, hers is mostly black and white. Common sense comes so naturally to Nan that she can't even see it for the gift it is. Raising a family kept her from pursuing dreams of becoming a doctor, but as a nurse she has excelled and gained considerable recognition for her chosen work with oncology patients who are terminal. While Mac's relationship with God is wide, Nan's is deep. This oddly matched pair are the parents of 5 unusually beautiful kids. Mac likes to say that they all got their good looks from him, because Nan still has hers. 2 of the 3 boys are out of the house. John, newly married, works in sales for a local company, and Tyler, a recent college grad, is off at school working on a master's degree. Josh and one of the 2 girls, Catherine, Kate, are still at home and attend the local community college. Then there is the late arrival Melissa, or Missy, as we were fond of calling her. Well, you get to know some of them better in these pages. The last few years have been, how might I put this, remarkably peculiar. Mac has changed. He is now even more different and special than he used to be. In all the time I've known him, he has been a rather gentle and kind soul. But since his stay in the hospital 3 years ago, he has been, well, even nicer. He's become one of those rare people who are totally at home in their own skin, and I feel at home around him, like I do with nobody else. When we go our separate ways, it seems that I have just had the best conversation of my life, even if I usually did most of the talking. And with respect to God, Mac is no longer just wide. He has gone way deep, but the dive cost him dearly. These days are very different than 7 or so years ago, when the great sadness entered his life and he almost quit talking altogether. About that time, and for almost 2 years, our hanging out stopped. As if by some unspoken mutual agreement, I only saw Mac occasionally at the local grocery store, or even more rarely at church. And although a polite hug was usually exchanged, not much of a consequence was spoken. It was even difficult for him to look me in the eyes. Maybe he didn't want to enter a conversation that might tear the scab off his wounded heart. But all that changed after a Naxi accident with... But there I go again, getting ahead of myself. We'll get to all that in due time, but just to say that these last few years seem to have given Mac his life back and lifted the burden of the great sadness. What happened 3 years ago totally changed the melody of his life, and it's a song I can't wait to play for you. Although he communicates well enough verbally, Mac is not comfortable with his writing skills, something that he knows I'm passionate about. So he asked if I would ghostwrite this story, his story, for the kids and for Nan. He wanted a narrative to help him express to them not only the depth of his love, but also to help them understand what had been going on in his inside world. You know, that place where there's just you alone and maybe God, if you believe in him. Of course, God might be there even if you don't believe in him. That would just be like him. That would be just like him. He hasn't been called the Grand Interferer for nothing. What you're about to read is something that Mac and I have struggled with for many months to put into words. It's a little, well, no, it's a lot on the fantastic side. Whether some parts of it are actually true or not, I won't be the judge. Suffice it to say that while some things may not be scientifically provable, they can still be true nonetheless. I will tell you honestly that being a part of this story has affected me deep inside. In places I had never been to before and didn't even know existed. I confess to you that I desperately want everything Mac has told me to be true. Most days, I'm right there with him, but on others, when the visible world of concrete and computers seem to be the real world, I lose touch and have my doubts. A couple of final disclaimers. Mac would like you to know that if you happen upon this story and hate it, he says sorry. But it wasn't primarily written for you. Then again, maybe it was. What you're about to read is the best Mac can remember about what happened. This is his story, not mine, so the few times I show up, I'll refer to myself in the third person, from Mac's point of view. Memory can be a tricky companion at times, especially with the accident, and I would not be too surprised, in spite of our concerted effort toward accuracy, if some factual errors and faulty remembrances are reflected in those pages. They're not intentional. I can promise you that the conversations and events are recorded as truthfully as Mac can remember them. So please try and cut him a little slack, you see. As you'll see, try and cut him a little slack. As you'll see, these are not easy things to talk about. From Willie. And that was the foreword.